So I exited half of the liquidity pools that I was invested into to just simply hodl in the market. And today I'm going to be telling you exactly why I did that and my plan with those and what I'm going to do going forward. So first things first, I want to show you what I got. I got about $6,700 in Ethereum to Edge right now, which is doing pretty great. No divergence loss, 90% APR, and it's at an overall profit. This strategy is recovering. And when I say recovering, I mean recovering, because if we look at all positions, you'll notice my first Ethereum to Edge position got caught in the market downturn the past couple months, where it rode its way down. Now, it profited compared to hodling. It did a decent APR, but then when I rebalanced, it did a better APR. It is still profiting compared to hodling at a much better ratio, and it is starting to recover the initial capital. I started with 10 grand in this position. I now have 6782. So I am on my way to recovery here, and there's no reason to not be in this pool because it's doing great results. Now, this is one that I'm personally considering sinking a little bit more capital into, mainly because I am very, very bullish on Edge, and I think it's at a solid price to buy in at. Additionally, it would help me recover my initial capital faster. Now, the other position that I'm in is over here on the Solana network. It is a Sol to Render liquidity pool where I am currently up $304. Not much, but I'm earning roughly $50 per day, and so far I have about $223 in unclaimed fees. Pretty good. And as far as divergence loss goes, I am profiting immensely compared to divergence loss. I only have $9 of divergence loss, and I have profiting $215 compared to hodling in the market. Now, the pool that I exited is actually Ethereum to Tau, and I want to tell you exactly why I exited it. This pool started off pretty great. It did a 55% APR, and for something like Ethereum and Tau, I thought that was a good APR at the time, which it was. And it profited compared to hodling in the market. It had a decent bit of divergence loss, but I was still profiting compared to holding in the market. Now I rebalance. Next position comes around. This is where it gets hit in that market downturn. Boom, down $9,800. Has a $675 profit compared to hodling in the market still, but it's down $9,800. And it had about $1,000 of earnings and was doing a slightly higher APR. So I rebalance because I'm close to going out of range. In this position, I ended up having a negative 1244 loss compared to actually hodling in the market, yet doing a 200% APR, still down a couple $100 on this specific position. And then I still had $1,200 in earnings. So my point being is this divergence loss hit the position hard. It took it from essentially profiting compared to hodling in the market, just being down, to now losing compared to hodling in the market, roughly by $600-700 or so. And that's even when I had high earnings and was doing a high APR. So I rebalanced because I was out of range and I had timed my rebalance to be a better rebalance than it was, but it still was not a good rebalance whatsoever because I had this much divergence loss. Now this position, it profited $37.70 because Tau started to go back up, and Tau started to go back up at a faster pace than Ethereum. And I had about $610 of earnings, and once again, loss compared to hodling in the market, negative $400. So at this point in time, I realized that the liquidity pool strategy right here for Ethereum to Tau is currently not working. It does not make sense. The reason why is because Ethereum and Tau had broke correlation, and on top of that, I kept going out of range and I was not doing that great of an APR. So if we were to zoom out, look at the past 6 days, you could see this is the period where it broke correlation. More recently, it's correlated, but at the same exact time, if it can break correlation that easily, I have to make sure I'm going into this position with a range that's going to be able to withstand these breaks in correlation. And if we look at the past 14 days, even then, that's only doing a 70% APR. So what I decided at that point in time is Ethereum was at a price of $1,700 and Tau was at a price of $340. Now here's the thing, Ethereum can easily go up to my initial entry price of $24.75, and Tau could easily go up to its initial entry price of $375. But which one has more upside? That's where we run the math. 345 to 375 on Tau is about 8.5% of upside, whereas 1700 to 2475 is about 45% of upside. So Ethereum very clearly had the greater upside. So this presents an opportunity. Well, I can stay in the liquidity pool, collect maybe a few percent per month in yield, and at the same time have divergence loss to worry about, and at the same time realize that these things are not correlated at the moment, and most likely lose compared to hodling in the market, but I'm printing yield, right? Or I can end up with more dollars, more money if I just simply dive into Ethereum. So that's what I did. I took all the money from the pool and I dove into just Ethereum. And then I leveraged that Ethereum by roughly 1.2x. So if you look right here at my transactions, you'll notice I grabbed 13.85 Ethereum by just simply swapping all the Tau and all the Ethereum, keeping it in Ethereum basically. And then I put that over on Aave right over here. That's currently 19.53 Ethereum because I already had a little bit over here. And then I took out a $4,000 loan, and then I took out another $1,000 because I decided I wanted a little bit more leverage. So $5,000 in total against 13.85 Ethereum. Keep in mind, the price was $1,700. So that's $23,500. And if we just divide 5 grand by this number, again, it's a relatively safe loan to value of 21%. But I go and I swap that 5 grand of USDC to 2.93 Ethereum and then add that as well. So that brings my 13.85 up to a total of 16.78 essentially that I now have exposure to. Now keep in mind, I still have to pay down that $5,000 borrow. But now that Ethereum has gone up to a price point of 1831, I have more money than if I was just in the liquidity pool strategy because Ethereum has more upside. So if we multiply that, you'll see I have $30,728 before my borrow. After my borrow, I have $25,728. Whereas the liquidity pool strategy, I would probably only have about $24,000, maybe $24,500 because of the divergence loss, and that would factor in earnings as well. They're not that high at the moment. Now, just for perspective, if we did not leverage up this position, it would have $25,362. So it would have just a couple $100 less. Nothing too huge or impactful on the position, but over time, as those percentage points start to stack up, that's where this is going to become very, very healthy for the position. And let me show you why. Because if Ethereum goes to a price of $23.25, we will have $39,000, right? We subtract the $5,000 and boom, that is $34,000 right there. Now that's the amount that I deployed in the position after you factor in all deposits. And I do mean all deposits. I mean the initial deposits as well as all the earnings that I actually compounded. So at $23.25, I have all my money back, including earnings, right? Break even on deposits, but actually at an overall profit if we look at my initial deposits, because my initial deposits were only $31,000. Now here's the thing, at a price of $23.25, if I didn't leverage, I would only have $32,200. I wouldn't have nearly as much. I'd be at a profit compared to my initial deposit, but not at a profit compared to my overall deposits, compounded earnings, stuff like that. Now, with that being said, my initial entry price was $24.75. At $24.75, right, my initial entry price, if I just hold the Ethereum, no leverage whatsoever, I do have a little bit of a profit compared to overall deposits. And I actually have all my earnings back whatsoever. I have above 34 grand basically. The thing is, adding a little bit of leverage, and I do mean safe leverage, gets me there quicker. And I say it's safe leverage because I think Ethereum is at pretty key levels. I'm still a firm believer in Ethereum. The Ethereum ecosystem is still thriving. There are still institutions only building on the Ethereum ecosystem, and there's still tens of billions of dollars on the Ethereum ecosystem, and it is still the leader of DeFi, which means when we look at my leverage position instead, I'll have $41,500. We subtract my $5,000 borrow, just like that, and we have $36,530. So we actually have a little bit of a profit, which is far greater than any of the earnings that I'm going to generate over the period that I expect Ethereum to go back to $24.75. So my point is, in this video, liquidity pools are not always the best strategy. You need to have contingency plans implemented into your portfolio. Again, liquidity pools are not always going to be the best strategy. Now, my plan is once we get back to a break even at $23.25, that 34 grand, now that I have my initial deposits plus all the earnings I had during that period, I'm taking that and I'm putting it directly into a liquidity pool. It might not be Ethereum to Tau, it might be something else, but ultimately I'm going to make sure that I stick it back into a liquidity pool so I can start earning income again. So what I'm doing in the meantime, while I'm running this successful Ethereum to Edge liquidity pool over here that's doing great, I'm also going to open up another market neutral liquidity pool where I hedge out my market exposure. My recent one did over 100% APR with no market exposure whatsoever, and it was on a meme coin, and it was a great profit. I was really happy with the results, so I'm going to be deploying more capital from my CDs right into DeFi and putting that in my market neutral strategies. And I use that income, I flywheel it into creating more positions like Ethereum to Edge and stuff like that. So that's like a grand and a half, $2,000 a month right now that I can take and just throw right back into crypto assets. And I'm also going to continue to run this sold to render position right over here. Again, this one's doing great right now. I'm very, very happy with the results. It's averaging out to a 55% APR or so right now, which is pretty solid in my personal opinion. On something like Sol Render, super good correlation, not really any divergence loss in this position so far. In my previous position, I also closed at about a $3,000 profit. All of that from earnings. I wrote it down, I wrote it up, I wrote it down, I wrote it up, but we got back to a break-even price, and I had all my earnings on top of that. So it was a really, really good example of what liquidity pools can actually do for you. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, notifications turned on. And as always, you guys know this, I will see you guys in the next video. There's also going to be a video on screen somewhere here that you guys can check out if you want to learn more about my strategy. Peace.